Michael Wolff, welcome to the program.
So glad to be here.
So this is, I would say, week two. It's the backlash week, the real pushback week. President Trump's major defenders were on television all weekend, and they have chipped away to the point that Steve Bannon himself is issuing some sort of mea culpa. How do you feel about that?
You know, this is the Donald Trump playbook: attack, 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 attack.
But he's your main source, and you seem to have quoted Steve Bannon.
In terms of Steve, but Steve didn't say anything that I got wrong. He merely said that it wasn't Don Jr. he was talking about; it was Paul Manafort. And listen, I'm very fond of Steve. I've gotten very fond of him, and obviously he's been very helpful, incredibly insightful. This is not true. As a matter of fact, and this is in the book, so he went through the steps. Why did Don Jr. do this? Don Jr.
You're talking about meeting with the Russians and all of that.
And Don Jr. did this to impress his father because he wanted to oust Corey Lewandowski and take over the campaign. And Steve said so he had to show his father he had the stuff. So this was definitely about Don Jr.
So we're in the he said, she said, and obviously some of the people are on the record, a lot of people are not. I think everybody is just staggered by your declaration that 100%, and those are your words,
100%
of the people around the president believe that he is incapable, unfit for carrying out the duties of this office.
100%. It is staggering. That is why, well, I think that's why this book has hit such a chord, because everybody sort of, it's the realization. He's to everyone. You cannot listen to this man. You cannot watch what this man does. You cannot see this man, read his tweets on a daily basis and not say something is wrong here. Everybody recognizes that outside of the White House, and it is the obvious thing to realize that the people inside the White House, who are just the same as you and I, say, what the hell?
Well, the thing is, though, we have to ask you and wonder, how on earth did you get people around him to even say that to you? Did they say it to you?
I'm going to tell you something. They say this to everyone. Everybody who they talk to. People in the Washington press corps, people in political circles, everybody knows this. So the only different thing that has happened here is that I said it.
If they say it to everybody, how come it's only just coming out in the way you're saying it now? And I guess the other question is, how did you get it? Did you talk to them and ask them those questions? Were you in rooms where you heard them discuss? What was the reporting?
Well, there are two questions there. This has not come out, and some of this has come out by the way. I mean, you know, so and so called him a moron, etc. That it has to a degree come out, but to the larger degree, everybody, and this is you know, daily reporters have to go back in the next day. So the luxury that I've had is that I parachute in, I'm there for 6 months. I'm out of there. I can say it because I don't have to go back.
At what point, you said you were there for 6 months, you heard all this stuff, which is, I'm afraid, terrifying. It is. Why should we be feeling comfortable if you're telling us that the President of the United States is universally believed to be unfit for this office?
I think you shouldn't. You should be terrified.
Why did you sit on it for so long? Did you feel not a duty to report? Did you not want to tell some people who may be in positions of power?
That's the point. I get to do this because I'm not a daily reporter. I get to go back.
No, but I'm saying, what did your conscience tell you?
No, it's not a question of my conscience. It's a matter of my conscience. I knew I could get this story, but I had to do it over a period of time. I mean,
so there was no point when you thought that you should tell somebody, guys, all is not right here.
In fact, on a journalistic basis, and this is not only part of the issue. Obviously, if something is on fire, you have to report it. But I did say to many people, and it was sort of my pass here. You know, nothing. You don't have to worry. I will just report this when the book comes out. Then people would say, "When's the book coming out?" I would say sometime next year. They would go, these are people who live in the moment. Sometimes next year, that's like never. But it's not, I got to do this. I got to understand the real alarm by people in the White House by going back day after day after day.
So the flip side of that previous question is, you kind of made your name, and I think probably ingratiated yourself with the White House by being a pretty staunch defender of the president in the early months during the campaign, and a critic of what you call the mainstream media.
I would say that's not entirely true. I wrote this
but there were a lot of columns against the mainstream media.
I wrote this quite negative, relatively negative portrait of the president in June 2016. I mean, that was the piece in which 2 weeks before the Brexit vote, he didn't know what Brexit was. Nevertheless, thank God it was Donald Trump. He didn't really read it. He just looked at the cover and liked the cover. So I got a pass there. In terms of the press, in the early days of this administration, I did think everybody had a knee-jerk reaction. I did think that this man had been elected president. I actually sort of felt like everybody who went to work for the president in the White House. This is strange, this is peculiar, but could it work? Yeah, maybe it could work. And I went in there with no assumptions. I would have been delighted to have written a book that said Donald Trump really knows what he's doing, and he has really gamed this, and in the end, this is going to be a successful presidency.
As it turns out, you didn't feel that.
As it turns out.
And as it turns out, the president has been tweeting that he is, in fact, very stable and a genius. And the White House has sent a cease and desist letter to you, to your publishers.
A sure sign of stability.
And they have, many people do that. And they have.
No, not many people. Never has a president done that.
Really?
Never. Never has a president done that.
Watergate? Pentagon Papers?
No, they tried a prior restraint, but this is a cease and desist letter because I have invaded the president's privacy and libeled the president. Never.
So your publisher basically feels the same way you do and says we cannot stand silent. We will not allow any president to achieve by intimidation what our Constitution precludes him or her from achieving in court. How far do you expect the pushback to go? And it's not just this stuff. You saw all the major cabinet ministers, the director of the CIA, and all the rest of it come out this weekend and push back on what you said. Pompeo, the CIA director, says, I brief him every day, and he's totally engaged, and he asks important questions.
And you have to do this. In order to work for Donald Trump, you have to do this. So I know people who are saying this, and I know what they say behind the president's back. There was an interesting thing on Saturday morning. John Kelly was asked about the president's, unusual, let us say, tweets of that morning. Reporter asked him, he said, I didn't see them. That's not true.
His chief of staff.
Yes, that's not true. Because I know the White House goes, every time the president tweets, the White House goes into a spasm.
Well, so does the rest of the world, particularly when it comes to major foreign policy issues. And you were around when a lot of decisions were being made. Tell me about the process that led to the president actually delivering a wicked punishment to Bashar Assad for using chemical weapons, which much of the world actually applauded.
Yes, and there were people, there were two factions in the White House. The president was not inclined to respond to this. Steve Bannon was not inclined to respond to this. And I'm not going to parse the politics here. But it was the president was just of a mind which was, why? What do I get out of this? And it was his daughter and other people, Dina Powell, who were very concerned about this and also saw this as an opportunity for this White House to act what you might call, to have a normal response. And it was very hard. They went through a whole series of efforts to focus him, to get his attention, and finally they had to do this through essentially a set of pictures.
But it was very important, actually, particularly after President Obama did not cross a red line in Syria.
It was important, yes, it was important to them, but it was the interesting thing here is what they had to do, how they had to move and manipulate this president. You know, because one of the major things, perhaps the major issue in this administration, is how do you get information to the president? Because he doesn't read, and he doesn't listen. That's a interesting double whammy.
And what about the other major sort of centerpiece of the administration? President Trump deputing his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to bring peace to the Middle East, to stitch up, I don't mean stitch up in that way, but to try to get together a whole new relationship between the White House and the royal family in Saudi Arabia. What was going on around those dynamics?
You know,
there?
I think it seemed to be a very a kind of, you know, a legitimate Trump foreign policy, different from the foreign policy we've had for a number of generations now. And his foreign policy was, you can do anything you want. I don't care what you do, if you do also what I want. Mm-hmm. So if you make me happy, I don't care who else you make unhappy, is essentially the U.S. foreign policy now.
So what he was saying, in other words, to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, is that what you're saying? That's
exactly.
The quid pro quo?
Exactly.
And where do you think the Russia investigation is going to end up? We've heard Steve Bannon say that it's going to be following the money. What do people in the White House feel?
I
do
would
they
say
feel it's coming
this.
home to roost or not?
The people in the White House actually feel that there is that collusion. If there was collusion, it's of a gang that couldn't shoot straight quality. Don Jr., if not inadvertent, no grand strategy there, but they do, and again, to a man, 100% believe that if it touches the money, then Donald Trump and his family have real problems.
And what about, again, for an American and a global audience, the whole idea of Donald Trump's sort of affection and affinity with quite a lot of these right-wing nationalist groups around the world? Let's say he supported Marine Le Pen in France. You know, there are others around Europe that got sort of support from him and his foreign policy team. Where did do you see, who was in charge of sort of linking European nationalism to the U.S. foreign policy?
You know, that was actually, when I interviewed the president in June, I specifically asked this question. I said, what's your relationship to the populist figures in Europe? And then I said, specifically, in Britain with the Brexit vote. And then he said, what? And I said, Brexit. And he said, what? And I said, the move for the UK to leave the European Union. He said, oh yeah, I'm for that. So is there any real thought out kind of thing here? I absolutely don't know.